They say comfort is the enemy of change. No matter how far I stumbled down this rabbit hole, the thought of trying a split layout keyboard never crossed my mind. Keyboards these days are heavy enough, and having to manage two boards instead of one sounded like more hassle than it was worth. And so I mostly brushed off split keyboards in the past. I thought that they just weren't for me. But the demand for them hasn't gone anywhere, and if anything, it's only picked up momentum. And it turns out Qwertykeys has been listening all along. Ever since the launch of the QK65 3 years ago, Qwertykeys has received a steady stream of requests for a split Alice layout offering. And now, after countless prototypes, redesigns, and internal tests, they finally delivered with the launch of the QK Alice Duo. Right out of the box, the QK Alice Duo's carrying case immediately stands out. It's the largest one we've ever seen coming out of Qwertykeys. This is because it needs to store both halves of the board along with a custom wireless pod that Qwertykeys developed specifically for the Alice Duo. The QK Alice Duo will retail starting at $289 before shipping and duties, but the price will scale up depending on whether you opt for add-ons like the color match wrist rests or additional plates and accents. There are 10 colorways to choose from this time, 5 spray-coated options and 5 anodized options. There are also just 2 PCB options to choose from, either a 1.2mm flex cut or a 1.6mm non-flex cut PCB. Both options are dual mode only and come without per key RGB. For plate material, there are 3 available options: aluminum, FR4, and polycarbonate. Interesting to note that the FR4 plates will come with flex cuts, while PC and aluminum plates come without flex cuts. Assembling the keyboard is straightforward as always. I opted for the non-flex PCB and built the board using the included QK stabilizers. Most QK offerings these days come with the ball catch design for screwless assembly, but the Alice Duo is put together using these hidden screws behind the keycaps. It's not too much of a hassle though, and it's probably a necessary step to keep the profile of the keyboard the way it currently is. The Alice Duo does still have the magnetic PCB connectors, which is a relief. There was a time when ribbon cables didn't bother me, but I've really been spoiled by Qwertykeys magnetic connectors. For my initial build, I'm using the aluminum plate without any foam, but I'll also have a few other configurations in the sound tests at the end of the video for you to check out. For mounting options, Qwertykeys is keeping it simple this time around with just 2 gasket options that are simply 2 different levels of squishiness. All in all, building the QK Alice Duo was a breeze, and tinkering with it will be fairly easy given the magnetic connectors. I wish the cases had the ball catch design to keep things truly streamlined, but I understand that trade-offs had to be made. One of the more interesting things about the Alice Duo is the dual-hinge system built into the bottom of each half. It allows you to tilt the keyboard up into a tented configuration so that you can either use the 2 boards at 0 or 5 degrees of tilt. Adjusting the board to the raised position, the Alice Duo essentially becomes a split tented Alice layout, which I found was optimal for typing comfort and reducing wrist strain during long typing sessions. The best way I can describe it is that the tilted angle rotates the wrists so that they're closer to a handshake position, which feels noticeably more natural than the 0 degrees of tilt. The hinge mechanism itself feels sturdy, and I had no issues with the keyboard collapsing on itself while using it in the raised position. It may not look this way, but engaging the hinge actually takes quite a bit of force, so it doesn't feel flimsy at all, and I feel pretty confident in its long-term durability. Typing in the tented position also did not affect the sound profile of the board, which was one of my initial concerns when seeing the renders. The board still sits on a solid frame that runs the length of each half, so sound isn't compromised the way it typically is with standard keyboard feet. The matching wrist rests also deserve a mention. They're designed to pair perfectly with the QK Alice Duo and are able to accommodate the board at both angles. The frosted acrylic top can be propped off to reveal an acrylic riser that elevates the height of one side to align with the angle of the board. To ensure the wrist rests don't distract from the overall design of the Alice Duo, the aluminum base also matches the finish that you choose for the board. In my experience, the tented angle naturally created more space under my wrists, so having the wrist rests there to support each hand made the typing experience noticeably more comfortable over longer typing sessions. So if you're intending to use the Alice Duo mainly in the tented position, I would strongly recommend checking out the wrist rests as well. The other major introduction with the Alice Duo is the wireless pod. Functionally, the pod provides enhanced signal processing capabilities to help improve the wireless performance of the board. Aesthetically, it's designed to pair perfectly with the finish of the keyboard and can be used as an accent piece for your workspace. It also has a clear window that shows the circuit board along with indicators for battery status, connection mode, and chosen operating system. By default, the knob of the wireless pod controls volume, and there's a narrow lighting strip as well for a bit of visual flair. There's also one small detail here that I really like. The QK nameplate on the pod is the same shape and size as the Duo smiley face on the keyboard itself, so you can easily swap between the two to your liking. When it comes to connecting the board, a lot has been done to streamline the process. Just plug in the wireless pod via USB, flip on the switches of both halves, and the QK Alice Duo will pair automatically. Despite having two boards to sync, the Alice Duo achieves a remarkable 8000 Hz polling rate in both wireless and wired modes. Key input feels snappy, and the board was extremely responsive during my time with it so far, which I spent predominantly in the wireless mode. When the time comes to charge the board or when you want to use it in wired mode, the Alice Duo comes with these handy magnetic cables that connect each side of the board to the receiver. They snap right into place, and once connected, the board will recognize the connection and automatically switch to wired connection mode. Similarly, once you're done with the wires, disconnecting them will bring you right back to wireless mode. There's no manual switch required and no awkward function plus QW or E combinations to fumble with. New to the QK Alice Duo is the ability to wirelessly remap keys through QK's custom VIA web configurator. There's no longer a need to connect your board by wire before opening up VIA, which is a small change but one that does streamline the experience, especially if you're the type to experiment with different key bindings often. Updating the firmware and charging the boards are still only available in the wired mode, so make sure you don't lose those magnetic cables. On the note of key remapping, the Alice Duo also has these clickable center buttons on each side that are programmed to control lighting by default, but can be remapped to other functions or macros using VIA. So now that I've spent some time with the keyboard, have I finally been converted to the split keyboard layout? Not really, but after using the Alice Duo, I can definitely see the appeal. Right off the bat, the ergonomics are indeed much better. Having the ability to position each half of the board at shoulder width is incredibly comfortable and made me realize how standard single-body keyboards force you to slightly roll your shoulders forward, which makes it really easy to start hunching your back as well while working through the day. By having the two sides of the board wider apart, my shoulders are able to stay in a more relaxed position, and I find that my back doesn't feel as tense after a long day in front of the computer. Now, doing this does push the mouse much further to the right, but I eventually realized that I could just put my mouse in the middle between the two halves. It looks extremely weird, but somehow felt much more intuitive than having to stretch my right arm all the way past the right half of the board. I also quickly realized that the open space between the two halves can also be used to keep your snacks and drinks in front of you, which was an entertaining perk that I never thought of before. For gamers, the wireless connectivity of the Alice Duo also allows you to easily use the left half only, which opens up the right side of your desk significantly for more mouse space. In addition, the small size of the left half itself allows you to switch between different angles, which can help when things get intense. Overall, while I will probably stick to standard single-body keyboards as my main daily drivers, I appreciate the novelty of the Alice Duo and would recommend trying out this keyboard if you're like me and never tried a split layout before. Honestly, it was refreshing to finally try something new again in a market that seems so full of keyboards that are more similar to each other than they are different. Qwertykeys' commitment to innovating in the keyboard space is always admirable to see. The tenting hinge mechanism is something I've never personally seen before in other boards, and I appreciate Qwertykeys researching this one feature that greatly expands the usability and appeal of the Alice Duo. I don't think this technology will be as widely relevant as the ball catch quick release mechanism or the magnetic PCB connectors popularized by Qwertykeys, but it just shows that Qwertykeys is committed to pushing the boundaries in the keyboard market, and they're not afraid to experiment with new features and technologies, which I think is really commendable. And so those are my thoughts on the QK Alice Duo. Let me know what you think about it in the comments. If you happen to be a split keyboard or Alice layout evangelist, I would love to hear about your thoughts and experiences. I've also prepared sound tests for a few different configurations at the end of the video, so let me know which one you like best. As always, thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.